Well, we tried to go old school there with the opening. Hey, tonight we will delve back into the dark side of the paranormal. Author and experiencer Nathaniel Gillis is with us to talk about his 20 plus years of research in the paranormal, and he is the founder of the Preternatural Epiphenomenal Philosophy. I hope I got that right. We'll find out when he comes on there. I think I pronounced that correctly. He is sought out to redefine the nature of haunting phenomenon, ghosts, and high strangeness. Join in as we discuss all things demonic and what defines the field of demonology. Welcome to the Three Beards podcast. My name is Craig, along with Austin and Chris.
Passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century.
Let me out.
I'm afraid that is quite
then live to send the innocent to their death? Is this justice and honor in Massachusetts colony?
All right, gentlemen. So, it was my birthday last week, so I only did one show, and then you guys, Chris bowed out, but Austin brought on two other guys. I mean, who are these guys? I mean, just laymen when it comes to college football. Keith and Javier brought them on, talked to that. So how'd that go? Nice.
Depressing, but we know how it was. So, Nate was talking about Ohio. It's up and down. It's definitely a shitty year, especially with number 3 this weekend, which I wish we were playing on better terms, but that's just how it plays, man. It happens. We have injuries and shit, so.
All right. Chris, were you good? Sort of.
I'm still hurt. I'm still crying, but we'll get it together.
All right. Well, hey, enough of this pity party. Let's bring on Nathaniel Gillis. How are you, sir?
Doing good, man. Doing good, dude.
Good.
I didn't realize I was on a podcast so I was watching a podcast years earlier. It was all about college football, and I was like, holy smokes, dude. So, yeah, man, it's been a rough year for college football. I mean, Alabama lost, which is something you never see unless it's in a championship, which is rare since 2014. But, yeah, man, I'm glad to be back with you guys. Not back, but glad to be with you guys and introduce my research to your awesome viewers.
Awesome. Well, yeah, no, we appreciate it. Like I said, I've been looking forward to this. Hello to everybody. Ron, Chassie, welcome to the show, everybody. First off, like I said, just a little bit about you two. So everybody, go to YouTube. You can find them on Facebook. You are on Twitter, correct?
No, I'm not on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Instagram as Nathaniel Gillis, and I use the same username on Facebook too.
Yep.
So
and also,
that's my
YouTube. You can go right here and click the subscribe thing, and if you go right here, boom! Look at that. You actually get notified. And then while you're doing that, there's this other little group called Three Beards Podcast. You can go over there and click and do the same thing too. We won't tell you no. We'll actually love you for it. So get him some subscribers there as well. Check out some of the videos. So you have a couple of books. A Moment Called Man, and then one that's in the works that's going to be coming out soon, The Skin That Crawls.
Yes, sir. I have a lot of people that have pre-ordered it. I'm going to get those books out to them first before I put it up there on Amazon. But yeah, so first book, A Moment Called Man, is designed for empaths. I lost a good friend to drug addiction. And so I decided to write a book in his honor, talk about how many people will medicate the gift they're called to manifest. And then I moved into my first book on demonology, which is the Skin That Crawls. And that's basically about the role of possession how it's mutated, literally mutated, not evolved, but mutated throughout history, and the role it plays in the UFO abduction phenomenon. And so I get into what are called soul hunters in antiquity, and it's interesting stuff, but it's pretty heavy for the average reader. So if anybody's interested in how demonology connects to the missing fetus syndrome, even, that book's for you. And once that's published, I'm going to hopefully connect with some people and make that into a motion picture so I can introduce this research to a greater audience.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm all over that. That is my thing. You know, just it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's Constantine. I mean, you just go through. If it has to do with stuff, it's like, damn, I'm all over those movies. Gotta get on. So yeah, I was one of the things like too. I really is just kind of basically just really where to start. I mean, I know, like, I got your bio.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really wanted to touch on, especially for this one, is, we had somebody else on before, and when it comes to demonology, how does somebody that has an interest, like layman's, where do they go to get more involved in this? Is there something like a mentor apprentice type program? Is there, I don't want to say institute. I mean, is there, is there a Hogwarts for demonology for people to go to? Yeah.
Can you imagine? I'm just going to disappear into a wall real quick. Hold on.
No, yeah, that's right. Go in your closet.
Yeah, right. Man, I get questioned a lot. There is no institute of demonology, especially for researchers. I mean, you have the Vatican, you have Catholicism, but they're wrapped in dogmatic demonology. They're limited to tradition. So they teach systematic demonology, which is horns and hooves, angels that fell from heaven and all this stuff. So in order for somebody to get a degree in demonology, I would recommend folklore or that kind of vein of research. What I did essentially is I grew up in Christianity. I got a hold of anything and everything I could that talked about demonology. That was basically the elementary aspect of the research. I mean, going to Christian bookstores, I had to go through that to grow through that. Once I grew out of that, though, I leaned heavily into the demonology of the ancient Near East, and that means going to academia, like going to bookstores and going into what professors, like textbooks and everything, and actually creating my own syllabus, literally almost, out of what the books and the teachings and the compendiums that they were getting out to their own students, I got a hold of. And so that's nice. So it was interesting because, you don't get a lot of good demonology from a lot of researchers because they're trapped in either Catholicism or, they're mainly basically in one vein of this thought. So what I did is I tried to transcend that. Why? Because at the same time I was researching, I was also going through paranormal events. What I realized very quickly was that what I was experiencing eclipsed everything that I was being taught through normal demonology. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I had to grow into new dimensions of thought. And even now, right now in my career, I'm still debating on whether I want to be identified as a demonologist, because the phenomenon itself is far larger than the shadows that dance across the wall. It's bigger. It's more profound and pronounced. So at this point, I'm considered a demonologist because that's where I arrived to this research studying. Hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, it did. And, it's one of those things, you in your bio too, it says you grew up. I think you grew up. I mean, it just says you lived in one. But then, I'm assuming, that just basically with one of the things that said it changed fundamentally, changed the thing. I'm assuming grew up. You were younger.
Pretty
when
much,
you
yes, it did. It followed me. Yeah. So the entity actually, if you don't mind, real quick, I grew up in a house. Was 6 years old. We moved into it. It was in Dayton, Ohio, and the very first open house, like just touring the building, I witnessed a full-bodied apparition, and so that was my introduction to this field. And then once we moved into the home, the malevolent presence evolved into shadow figures, disembodied voices, a pervasive stench of decomp, that would just enter the room whenever it would show up. I went through a series of hauntings and haunted dreams, I should say. Like there was one particular nightmare that haunted me, where I would go to sleep at night, and it would be black and white. It was never in color, but I would witness a young man put a 357 Magnum in his mouth and pull the trigger. I would wake up and I would sense this presence filling the room. It made me feel like a very small particle, like it was like I was meaningless compared to it. But it followed me. You know, I would go stay the night at friends' houses for sleepovers, and it would manifest. But what that meant to me, though, is profound, because, like I said, at the same time I was experiencing these manifestations, I was attending a local church. And, you know, and what I learned real quickly, though, is if what I was experiencing did not fit their blueprint of demonology, either I was crazy, I was a lunatic, or I was lying, or it would just never happen. And so that's when I realized that demonology as a field of study, even though we may have great researchers, and we do, we have great ideas, and we do, a large part of demonology has failed to come up with answers here. And we're going to discuss why. Because we've been asking age-old questions, the same questions, right? Trying to get new answers. And I do believe that's a relevant aspect of the research. But what we can't do is limit ourselves to dogma. And that's what a lot of people want me to do. You know, I have people comment on all the time on my shows, you know, they want me to believe in fallen angels. They want me to believe in all these different aspects without having the evidence for it. This phenomenon is pervasive, it's interreligious, and it's cross-cultural. It's bigger.
Yeah, that was one of the things too. Is you just said that. That's kind of been I think that's a really good way to put it too. Is just where instead of trying to say what it is, how about we just figure out? You know, like you know, I'm trying to think before I say, you know, try to figure out what it is instead of saying what you think it is.
Right.
You know, actually,
right.
And that's. Go ahead.
It's. I'm sorry.
No. I was saying go ahead. I was not going to walk over you.
We inherited descriptions from our ancestors, descriptions of phenomena. And then what demonology did is they began to use descriptions as definitions. Like we go back to biblical antiquity, you know, we began to demonize consciousness. We'd have an apparition, and so that's a demon. Why? Well, we don't know. It's a demon. Why? Well, it gave me something that I didn't like, or it told me something I didn't agree with. That's a demon. And so what our ancestors begin to do is they begin to divide angels from fallen angels. Well, what were angels? Angels were entities that would manifest and give people hope, love, faith, and all that stuff. Vice versa, we would have apparitions that look like angels, same substance, and they would manifest and give somebody bad news or an omen, or maybe somebody was terrified of it. And next thing you know, our ancestors begin to demonize disincarnate consciousness. And so this whole idea in Mesopotamia and the Levant was essentially that there were people that lived and died, and once they grew out of their body, they evolved, and some evolved into what we would call angels, others evolved into what we would call demons, or mutated into demons. But somewhere in history, they begin to make a distinction between these two forms of consciousness. That's why when we get into systematic demonology, it fails because they're limited to one certain time period of theology, right? So you get, okay, they're fallen angels. Well, when does that beget? You know, when does that occur? Well, fallen angels, you know, was a theory, and that originated in a certain time frame. So they literally just splice out a period of history that props up their theology, ignoring what preceded it, and ignoring the legends that created the fallen angel narrative. So the Hebrew word for angel is malachim. In comparative etymology, comparative literature, malachim meant deceased ancestor. So again, we're dealing, even your Genesis 6, that's why it's all confusing to people. When you understand what fallen angels were to them, then we understand what it should be to us in terms of discussing these different topics. But that's why it's very important that we get these terms right. Like whenever I lecture on Genesis 6 and the Nephilim legend, people are still stuck in the fallen angel mentality, and they're not understanding that the entire narrative here is literally the dead being impregnated into the bodies of the living. It's what it's always been. And I'll stop because I don't want to. I can go on and on, Bob.
Oh
Wow.
no.
So in your research and
Yeah.
upon your traveling, you think that they prop the archangels and the fallen angels up with their theory to make it true.
The
But
theory, yes.
but you haven't found any evidence in your visions and your aborigines that these actually exist. Am I correct?
Right, right. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you read these texts, especially in biblical antiquity, you have to get their worldview, which is difficult, highly difficult, until you start reading the literature they read, right? That literature that they read built the foundation of their folklore. And so we have a lot of researchers who credit their research basically by saying, hey, listen, I'm not even going to read what they read. I'm going to read what they wrote. And if you only read what they wrote and not what they read, you're not a good researcher, right? Because you're limiting yourself to just King James Version, right? It's very interesting. But again, if you want to understand how the Tower of Revelation was built, you've got to look at the literature they used for their foundation. And the literature they used for their foundation literally meant that angels were it was consciousness that died and it was disincarnate. It would manifest as an apparition. Now, many people would confuse that like with dead people. So in certain cases, you would have people who would use that term malakim in a way to describe someone's ghost or someone's apparition. Now, how do we know that? Well, we know that through ancient Mesopotamian texts. We know that through the comparative literature and comparative etymology of malakim. Now, not only do we know that in that context, but we also know that when we get to the New Testament, when Peter, right, because remember, we have to read what they read to understand what they wrote. Peter's family sees Peter knocking on the door. They make a reference that we often miss. I missed it when I was in evangelicalism. They said, this must be Peter's angel. Wait a minute. No, they believe that was Peter's apparition. And so if you understand the context the way they did, then go back into Genesis 6 and says, okay, these watchers, who were they, right? They're fallen angels. Well, what do you mean fallen? That's a term for people that died. I fell in battle. It's a Hebrew idiom that's used throughout the entire Old Testament. I don't want to get too much into that because there's a lot more to talk about here today. But I think that's one piece of evidence that really teaches us that, again, in order to understand what they wrote, we have to understand what they read. What formulated their theology? And I think that's why systematic demonology has really given us the short end of the stick, because they've limited themselves to one microcosm period of time, and they're not going deeper back to the origins of a lot of these teachings.
Well, I agree. I mean, just completely with what you just said, because the way you phrase it too is perfect. Because if you take one source, I mean, you're basically taking on a bias. Like the King James Version. That was written for that, for that leader
by King James. Right?
Yeah, and he wanted. That's what he wanted. That's why it's called the King James Version. And so, if you go strictly with the King James Version, you're like, what did he not want in there? Right. And that's like I said. You summed it up. Perfect. I said the way you did it.
I got people that I grew up with that literally, I'm not even exaggerating, they literally believe the King James Version is the holy Word of God. It is the divine breath of God. And I'm thinking, dude, since when did God, like, he wrote the Torah in Shakespearean English? Like, there comes a point of time, like at least with the people I grew up with, there comes a point of time when I have to look at them and say, whoa, this goes way beyond illiteracy. Not only do they don't care they're illiterate, they want people to believe in this lie. Man, I get a little bit triggered when we get in that area because, man, I grew up with all these people, man, and they say they don't read any other translation or any other version of the King James Version, and I'm just like, whoa, dude, it's very interesting the way they think.
Even good pastors I talk to correlate to other books to get footnotes to preach out of the King James, but they still read other dialogues and get other information. But some people just strictly stick to King James, and that's it.
That's it, man. And that's extremely problematic for a host of reasons. And I know good people that believe that. And I don't, but when we get down to scholarship, that's a whole different conversation. We can't. save people from having their feelings hurt when we start to deal with topics where there's concrete evidence. It's just there. You can't ignore it.
Yeah, we've talked about this many times. Like, we've had several shows where it's one of those. There gets to a certain point where, it's either all or nothing. I mean, it's just you can't pick and choose what you want. It's they're like, well, that's just kind of that's just matter of speech. That's just kind of they didn't mean that literally. Well, it's either literal or it's not. I mean, you can't pick and choose what I'm going to believe as absolute doctrine and what is just like, well, that didn't really happen that way. Well, it has to. I mean, if I said there's no way to.
Yeah.
And this, the way the word thinks in the King James bores me to tears.
It's quite boring, dude. If there was anybody that asked me, okay, like let's say somebody says, because I get a lot, what version you read, especially with the New Testament, I read the AENT, Aramaic English New Testament, because it gives you, footnotes, all kinds of stuff that was actually built into the language that they used to write about. It's fascinating stuff. But yeah, man. But a lot of my research lately has consisted of, like, obviously, I'm to the point now, guys, where I've ignored the fact that this phenomenon is larger than demonology. Now what I've been doing is looking at the phenomenon in the terms of what are its behavioral patterns, right? Throughout history, if you go into a crime scene and you're a profiler, you can know the entity that committed the crime because you recognize its behavioral patterns. And so in my field of study, what I've realized is that we in demonology, and at least what we've taught and studied, we saw the footprints of the UFO abduction phenomenon, but we didn't really realize what we were seeing. We didn't have this modern abduction phenomenon as a frame of reference, right? We didn't really have anything to kind of compare it to. But in my research, what I've realized is that we've been dealing with these entities even from Genesis 6. And I know that's not just what I'm saying. There's a lot of other research that are stuck in Christianity that are saying that. But I do it in a little bit different way. These entities, in my research, are profoundly interested in using our species to self-replicate. They have the ability not only to put consciousness into us, but to create fetuses, to abduct women after they've inseminated them with other men's, whatever. They will create this hybrid creature and they will take it out. Now that recipe for deceit, the recipe for someone, especially a woman, going into a dream state, encountering an entity, and then being assaulted in a dream, and then being pregnant from the dream, that's not something that's a modern phenomenon. That reaches all the way back into the halls of history. Number one, we need to realize that they've hacked our belief system. Now, we're going to get to some implications here that are really profound and disturbing. They have hacked our belief systems. We do not know if the religions that we as humans believe in, if these religions were created by them as a way to communicate to us or to manipulate us. Why do I say that? Because I've worked with women all across the world who have been manipulated by these entities the same way people have been manipulated by religion. These entities will manifest to the woman in the image of someone they trust. They've either had intercourse with, a husband or former lover, or a person of authority. In the actual consummation, the woman will be physically assaulted. She'll think it's a dream. The next day, she wakes up with fingerprints and where she's being held down. I've had that in cases. But essentially, what we have here are people being induced into a dream state to where they do not know if what they're experiencing is real or not. Now, and then after the dream is over, they wake up the next day thinking, okay, that was just a dream I had of me having intercourse with an ex-boyfriend. 3 months later, they're pregnant. Wow. So what this entity was doing, and I've had this with multiple women I've worked with, but specifically a lady that was in India, they will literally appear to the woman as someone she's either been with or her husband, obviously, who she's been with. So it's usually somebody that they've had consummating intercourse with. Why? Because that increases their probability of seducing the woman. Not just that, but actually copulating with her. Then it begins to see It's very interesting. If the woman will believe that it's just the image, right? That okay, I'm really dealing with my boyfriend, or yeah, okay, this really is just a dream, or even sometimes it's even happening in real life where the person, the female's awake, or this really is my husband and it's not. So in demonology, we would call that the incubus or incubi phenomenon. That's been happening for thousands of years. So I do not subscribe. I love David Jacobs, but I do not subscribe to these entities only manifesting to us in the last century. I think that, again, if you limit your research to that period of history, of course you're going to come to that conclusion. But if you look at the behavioral patterns, they've been doing this forever. But here's the problem here, guys. They're not just impregnating our women with their species. We have evidence that they're also killing the babies that they're impregnating. Case in point, Dr. Carla Turner had a female who, when she was abducted by Jesus. They hacked her belief system, right? Here's Jesus. It's not the biblical, rabbinic, Jewish Jesus. It's the Swedish Presbyterian Jesus. So it's not literally, this is not somebody trying to teach us doctrine, right? It's literally conforming to whatever we want to believe it is. Whoa. Walks up to her, holds his hands out and says, all seed is mine. All seed belongs to me. The other course, she wakes from the dream without the abduction. 2 or 3 months later, she's pregnant. She sits down with her husband and says, I'm pregnant. I don't know how. I don't know what's going on. She says, but this fetus is not a viable specimen. Very interesting phraseology.
Yeah, it is.
The child dies. She's abducted. It's an area of the research very, very few people even talk about. In the abduction, Jesus comes back to her, still hacking her belief system. It's not Muhammad. She's not a Muslim. Right? So it's hacking her belief system, walks in there, hands her a hybrid baby. At this point in the hypnosis and memory session, she's talking to Dr. Carla Turner. She's crying. She says, I don't understand what I'm about to tell you. All I know is that it happened. She said, okay. She said that the child, the hybrid baby they gave me to hold had the consciousness of the baby I lost in it. So they're not just hatching babies, they're hatching consciousness. So their interest here is not just some biological DNA swapping and all that stuff. No, we're dealing with an intelligence that has the ability and the evidential interest to pull the soul out of the body.
That's wow.
We're getting some deep stuff here, man. I mean, can I get deeper?
Oh yeah.
It's very troubling. The second dimension of this thought, we have abductees. This is a lot of Ray Fowler's work too, but I'm hoping to carry on his legacy. We have abductions that occur. We've been seeing these abductions forever, but we didn't understand what was actually happening. For instance, we have cases where people would witness like men and women just like coming through a wall and then going up to a ship. Okay, it wasn't a physical bodily abduction. And what we had experiencers even that had experiences abductions who didn't quite understand it. They said, I don't understand, but they took my body and they pulled me through a window, or they pulled me through a door, or they pulled me through a wall. And then these experiencers, they witnessed the abduction in real time, just like you and I would if they abducted our body. The only problem is, and this is a very key point, they also remember as their soul was being peeled out of their body, and they're watching their body in bed as they float away into a ship. So there is a measure of these abductions that is nothing like some of these researchers want it to be. And what do I mean want it to be? Because I'm big. I'm not saying I'm deep in the field, and I know a lot of people there. And so what we have here, we have people that are actually silencing a lot of these experiencers. I know it for a fact. They're like, if they write a book, they'll have people that write in and say, this is what happened to me, it's pulled out of my body and all this stuff. And if it doesn't fit the blueprint of their abduction, they won't even put it in their book. So that aside, we have cases where the consciousness, the soul itself, is separated from the body. And not just that, but is being taught certain doctrines and certain knowledge. The soul is, not the body.
Now, is this one of those where do you feel like this is in league with some of the old families, the lineages, where there's always been rumor that they've been behind some of the UFO activity? You know, that some like this is a lot of this stuff is man-made craft, but that this is one way that they're actually achieving the same thing, where they're working on this hybridization at the same time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's why possession plays such a huge role in this, right? We're not just swapping spit and swapping DNA. No, we have cases where these abductees have actually been threatened, where we will take your soul out of your body, put someone else's in it, and your family will never know you're dead. They'll never know you're gone. And so when we get into understanding some of these families, I don't believe that they're just, like I said, it's not just swapping DNA. We literally have souls and bodies. Souls. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, would that be some of the cases where, because you've always had that person where there'll be people that'll say, this isn't my husband, this is my wife, they're completely different. It's like people are like, he was such a nice guy at work, and now all of a sudden he is just like, it's like a complete 180. Like everything is completely different, like violent, angry, lashes out, where it used to be just this really nice person.
Right. Absolutely. Now again, that's why let me say this. That's why understanding the nature of possession would add clarity to a lot of researchers, because if we get into biblical antiquity, we understand, first of all, that possession was never about horns and hooves. Possession, we understand what possession was based upon the antidote, the exorcistic rite, right? We understand, It's like, okay, if you look at the antidote, it always carries the curse in it. It always carries, right, the disease in it. So what is the antidote? It was the exorcistic rite. So what was the exorcistic rite designed to do? Well, it was designed to cleanse somebody from corpse pollution. Yes. Yeah, corpse pollution. So in biblical antiquity, which is even before that Mesopotamia, you would have people that go into houses where a ghost was or a corpse was. And so if they came in contact with discordant consciousness, some of them would go get possessed. And so they would go see a priest, and the priest would sprinkle holy water, and they would do their rite of exorcism. So in order to understand what possession is, we have to understand that it's ghosts who are commandeering the consciousness of a living person. How do we know that? Because just like you said, these entities will demonstrate memory, language preference. They'll demonstrate, like you're talking about people who've changed their entire diets overnight, right? So different personalities possess people. But when we understand that concept, then we also understand that these entities have the ability to impregnate women, not just with babies, but to impregnate them with their own consciousness. Okay? Now, this is why I when I'm on panels and people they always ask me, what do you think is a big misnomer in demonology? Well, I will always say, until I learn something cooler, that the biggest misnomer is that the Dybbuk is limited, or it's about some wine box that a spirit possesses. That's never what a Dybbuk or a Dybbuk was. But in order for us to understand this, like I said, it's bigger than demonology, it's bigger than ufology and all that. We have to understand what possession was. Now, the Dybbuk legend was in the 16th century. Let's look at their capabilities here. Okay? Mm-hmm. These women, it was in a province in Israel called Safdi. These were abductees. Women would go to bed at night. They would be induced into a dream state. They would meet an entity that would mimic the image of a lover or a husband. It would have intercourse with her in the dream. And then the next day, she would become possessed by the entity they were just assaulted by. This is the Dybbuk phenomenon of the 16th century. If you guys want a reference, just look up, it's Kabbalistic. So you got to look up Isaac Luria and Hamid Tao. These are Kabbalistic texts about possession. So watch how these entities evolved and mutated thousands of years ago and hundreds of years ago. Watch this. So what once was limited to a woman being possessed by the entity that assaulted them evolved into them being possessed by the assaulter and impregnated with the entity that assaulted them. To the point, hello, missing fetus syndrome, to the point that when they would reveal themselves to the exorcist, the entity would look like a fetus in their womb, as if she was pregnant with the entity and not just possessed by them. So I would hypothesize, just throw this out there for researchers here, is it possible that these entities see possession as a form of pregnancy? And is it possible that the missing fetus syndrome is not all about just babies and all this stuff, but placing their consciousness in people and being born into this dimension, looking through our eyes at us?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So that's wow. I'm like I said, I'm
still.
I mean, that,
popcorn.
Yeah, because it's one of those things. Yeah, because it's one of those. It's one of those things too, where it's you always have that abducted. I was pregnant and now the baby's gone. Well, this would be that type of thing too. And that's. I think I had something on there too. It's just where. Because I was going to ask about the connection between this. So, what do you feel is, I mean, it's if you knew, obviously you'd be really rich because you'd have the answers, But it's just what are you seeing as the end game? Because you also talked earlier, that throughout this history we've been seeing this. Because there's always those people that says it feels like there's more activity. Do you feel it's ramping up? I mean, do you feel like there's more activity? Or just in modern social media, how everybody talks. And so, kind of like that two-part. Do you think it's ramping up? And two is just, what do you, about that? What do you feel is going on, like the end game?
Yeah, well, the end game is dark. I consider these entities what are called soul hunters. My God, we're going to get to some serious stuff here. Oh my God. So in Ezekiel chapter 13, Yahweh, the God of the Bible, refers to these entities as soul hunters, those who hunt the souls of men to make them fly. We had no concept of what that was until the first abductee came out and said, hey, time out, guys. They hunted my soul and made it fly. Hello, right? We had no concept of that. So we read it for thousands of years. What does this mean? What does it mean? And Yahweh mentions that. Now, when Yahweh references that passage, he's literally talking about entities that will separate the Ba'a soul from the body. It's very interesting. So the Ba'a soul in Egyptology is the soul that flies out of the body like a bird, right? This is why in demonology, Psalms 91 in your demonic text in the Bible, it mentions the snare of the fowler. That's these guys. Woo, right?
Wow.
He's talking about entities that have the ability to pull your soul out of you and then cause you to fly. Now, what I mean by that is there is no behavioral pattern that these entities have demonstrated or are demonstrating that doesn't already fit into ancient necromancy, even down to the nature of the implant. Can I tell you that the original implant was in the first, it was in the late Iron Age, and it was called teraphim. Teraphim was first introduced by necromancers who would go dig up a corpse, take a piece of metal, hollow implant, carve the name of an unclean spirit on it, and implant it into the body of the cadaver. The consciousness of that ghost would merge with the metal and possess that body. This is still happening. So this is not just, yes, I'll stop. But
no. I was just like, it makes, as you're just saying it, just where, like a recap, like what we've been talking about, just because I'm thinking, that passage that you said from Ezekiel, in the context, like you've laid out, it has a completely different meaning. Because like when you read it, you're thinking, okay, soul hunters, this is the devil coming to take my soul to hell.
Right.
No, you're literally laying out the case that this is an active, hunt. Like this is, you are,
hunters.
Yeah, they're finding, the souls that they can reap, and they're actually taking them. And that's a whole different, scenario.
Absolutely, and it makes a heck of a lot more sense. But once you start getting into that text, he also mentions something that's quite alarming, as if we aren't already alarmed. He mentions what I call the currency of consciousness. He makes a fleeting reference to this. He says, those who should live die. Wait a minute, who's killing them?
Yeah.
Those who are dying should live. What he's implying here, guys, is that the way they're surviving is by killing. And that's why he called them soul hunters. Now, this entire narrative here, again, in Ezekiel 13 especially, before I would ever, lecture about that, you have to get a foundation of what possession was. When we're dealing with people who can dislocate their consciousness and dispossess their own bodies and place it in other people, where in history have we seen that first? Okay, James Frazier, in his book, The Golden Bow, he makes a reference to these warriors who in the battle, when they're fighting, if they had a mortal wound and they knew their body was going to die, they would dispossess their own body, place their consciousness in another person. There's the end game. And that way, their consciousness survives as long as they can find someone, a mortal portal, to self-replicate, to create a species through the womb of a woman, to possess. And so now we would have, and I mean, we can go into many different sects. Because I don't do anything but research. I'm a boring guy, and I have ADHD. So once I get onto this stuff, dude, like,
because this, like you're taking, that's one of the age-old questions. Obviously, there's always going to be the willing ones, the ones that are like, I want to be involved in this.
Yeah.
They want to go through this process. But is there a way that you can safeguard yourself from this, or is there steps that you can take to ensure, that you aren't that you aren't selected? I mean, because I'm just still a big believer. In order to be possessed, you have to open yourself up. You can't just be walking down the street and just smack. You have a demon.
Right. Well, okay. I once believed that too. Because I grew up in that kind of mentality, and it's good. It's fine. I mean, I obviously respect that. What I will suggest is that the research that I've been doing lately, that literally has made me quit researching for a month or two, or even like I went to Rhode Island for a week because of some of the stuff that I was just researching. Let me give you a scenario here.
Okay.
Let me give you a real scenario. There was a woman that had been abducted before in her life, and she could tell when the abduction was building up, the energy in her would change. And she was always, worried that she didn't have control over her own body and all that stuff. Well, she had recently become a Christian, and she, was getting to church and everything, praying and everything. And one night she begins to feel that age-old feeling where the energy begins to build up. She opens up the Bible and she begins to pray. She doesn't pray something that the priest gave her. It's not Hail Mary, all that stuff. This is actually red letter. It's the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Eyes roll in the back of her head and they pull her out. It wrecked me because at that point, we're looking for divine intervention. Now, I have a lot of people that follow my work, and they want me, right? They're confident if I say the name Jesus, it works, and I don't really care. Or they'll even have the audacity to say, well, you didn't say Jesus hard enough, or loud enough, or you didn't believe in Jesus enough. And then they begin to discredit the own belief of the abductee, which is really bad too. But is it possible we're dealing with a species that just doesn't care? Like, is it possible? I mean, because we have cases. See, okay, let's look at the data sample. Yes, we do absolutely have people that use religious amulets, and sometimes it's worked. We also do have people that use Jesus and different, religious formulations, and sometimes they do work. But the other 90% of it, we have people, Muslims being abducted. We have children being abducted by Mickey Mouse. We have wives being abducted by their husbands. And then after, when on the ship, they realize, okay, this is a screen memory or something, and it's not really real. So what we have here is a species that not only is operating with impunity, but they have the option, how, to pull you out of yourself to hide their presence inside of your consciousness. Not just that, but to educate your soul memory. What do I mean by that? Okay. Betty Luca, her husband witnessed one night. He rolls over. He sees Betty Luca coming out of herself. She goes into the ship during an abduction. Now, they're teaching Betty Luca stuff. They're not teaching her body stuff. Look at the technological implications here. I can pull you out of you, keep your body alive. She's still in bed with her husband, but her soul is on the ship with them. This isn't Nathaniel Gillis. This is Ray Fowler's work. A lot of it's everywhere in this field. But anyway, they start teaching the soul certain things. And then right before they put her back into her body, they said, now you're not going to remember this. Then why tell me? Right? Why put me in a chair and teach me how to fly a ship? And then right before you repackage me into my skin, oh, by the way, you're going to forget. When I heard that, I came up and I went, oh my God, because they were not educating her for the purposes of muscle memory. No, they were educating her soul. And then when she got back into her body, she was in this one dimension of memory. And the only way she remembered what her soul was taught, it's deep stuff, is when she went into memory regression. And then subconsciously, she could begin to regurgitate everything that they whispered into her soul. Now, is it possible they're recruiting dead people while they're alive? Is it possible that they're educating the consciousness and then pulling it out? If that's possible, then we have a significant problem as a species, because there are people that they are educating, they're maturing, they're evolving in a sense, and there are other people that they're just completely leaving out for whatever reasons. But also, I don't know how much time we have. We have, what, 10 more minutes?
Yeah, we're
right,
right about 10, 15, yeah.
All right, I'm going to throw this down to you guys real quick. Is this good so far? You guys enjoying yourselves?
Oh, yeah,
I talk fast.
Yeah, no, it's what if we're not saying much, it's good. And that's like I said, it's one of those, because especially, I don't know if you've noticed, I've already had the pin out. I've been making notes.
Oh man,
and that's
so getting into the soul first, body second concept of mine. One thing that is fascinating is that there's evidence that the markings that we're seeing on people's body happen to the soul first. So it's not just the punch biopsies of Bud Hopkins research. I also believe obviously they're doing stuff to the body, but there's a second dimension of manifestation here we really need to pay attention to. The first time I experienced these symbols and the carvings and manifestations in my own work was by reading Father Sinestrari of Amino. He's a Franciscan priest. He was having incubi cases where women were being assaulted by these entities, being impregnated, and actually leaving semen samples on their victims. It's very important here. It's just like Bud Hopkins, right? Yes. So we also had cases where women would die later on at like an old age or tragedy. It wasn't from the assault, but they were victims of incubi. Anyways, during the autopsy, they would peel the eyelids back, and these entities had carved their symbols underneath the eyelids of their victims. Horrifying. But these, so in the research, we know that they would carve things on bodies, and even in hauntology, we know that they would scratch people. But there's a little portion of research here that I think is worth considering that is mind-blowing. Now, when we start dealing with the idea of soul first, body second, I did a show last year, and a gentleman reached out to me. His father was a renowned remote viewer. His father would go into a trance state. He would leave his body, and he would meet these guides of his. And he said that he would meet these entities, and he would get knowledge and words and stuff. And then the next day, he would have a meeting with local politicians, local celebrities in the city. He would give them readings. A lot of them came true. Some of them didn't. He said, but one night, he said his dad stumbled down the stairs, incoherent, crying. He looked like a ghost. He couldn't breathe, and he's freaking out, and they couldn't get him calmed down. Finally, he just faints. Taken to the hospital, they get him doped up on happy pills. Finally, get his blood pressure in control, and everything's working out. He had a heart attack. And they asked him, they said, what exactly happened to you? He said, I met these entities that I thought were my guides. And they turned out not to be the entities that I thought they were. And he said they changed their apparition. And he said, when they did, he said, I was thrown back into my body. And then he pulled his shirt down. And he said, when I got back into my body, I looked down and I saw them begin to carve religious amulets into my chest. Now, here's why demonology's failed us. Here's why ufology's failed us. Okay? These entities are interreligious. Okay? So usually demonologists go in there with a cross, or a rabbi will go in there, with the Star of David, all that stuff. Priest go in there with a rosary, all that stuff. These entities had literally carved the Star of David, a cross, and then Egyptian hieroglyphs as an ark. Now, it did not happen until he got back into his body.
So are you saying that they need to carry all of these items with us?
I don't know. We don't know. I don't know, because they're using these almost as if like an equation. 2 + 2 = 4, right? Or layering their amulets in a way that we're not familiar with. It's very interesting. Now, what do people... I'm sorry?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. No,
you're good.
Because, you have that, quote. I'll just see if I get it right. It's like the reason, they're playing a different game than the ones we're playing. And that's what I was just saying.
Different.
So you have like the Catholic priest that's holding the cross, throwing this holy water. Well, it's one of those things. This is like me trying to compete against you, and I'm trying to play a game of basketball, but meanwhile you've got pads and you're tackling. We're playing football. And I'm trying to scream that my rules of basketball you're not following, and it's
oh my God.
Yeah.
And you don't know, are they really winning? We don't even know how they're keeping score. And again, if we're going to go down that vein of research, it's like parapsychology, and I have a lot of respect for parapsychology, but if we're going to look at this through the scientific lens, sure, you can tell me how many squares that go onto a chessboard, but that doesn't determine the rules of the game.
Yeah.
So they're playing by different rules because they're playing a different game. Now, what I'm saying here, guys, is that they're doing things to the soul first, and it's manifesting on the body second. They went into his body, they begin to manifest on the skin. And that's not just me saying that. We have Betty Luca. Again, this is the Betty Andreasen Luca saga, whatever you want to call it. This is Ray Fowler's work for all of you researchers. Bob Luca said that night when she got back into her body, okay, what did they abduct? Her soul. When she got back into her body began to demonstrate scoop marks and scarifications. They didn't take her body. Right? So soul first, body second. Wouldn't you know that Ian Stevenson's work, when we're dealing with consciousness in another body, Ian Stevenson deals with people who said they have past lives and they have death wounds. When they were reborn, their soul was reborn, their body began to manifest what was on the soul. So whatever we're dealing with here, guys, it's a completely, like there's nothing more alien to the human species than what they're doing to us. First of all, they're educating people's souls. Betty Luca never flew a ship again. Ever. Embodied. But that's also why they're telling these people you're not going to remember this until they get into that dimension where it's soul memory and now it comes back to them. So this is a whole different, like I said, a whole different dimension of thought, but nothing says demonology has failed us than these entities taking up all of these dogmatists and wrapping up under a ball of philosophy and saying we don't just abide by Judaism, we don't just abide, right, by Christianity, and we don't abide by Egyptology. What are we really dealing with here?
Now, some of those things are carving in. Are they doing the demonic sigils, like the houses?
I don't know.
Almost like we're branded like cattle, type thing, where it's just like you're being marked like you now belong to this house type thing.
Correct. There is I don't know if it's just an hierarchy, but there is a belief system here. Like if you get into some of these entities, like Geraldine Orozco's work, she witnessed these entities performing satanic rituals during these abductions. So all of this fits in the blueprint of these being the ancient necromancers. It's the same technology, guys. Merging consciousness with metal. I think that's why a lot of percentage of your abductees step on a craft that they believe's alive. Right? Again, it's how it's not just an understanding of how to survive bodily death, but how do we propagate that consciousness? How do we keep that consciousness in that state of existence? But that's my research, guys, in a nutshell. I think that we're dealing with something that is profoundly alien, profoundly, not just ET, more alien than that.
Yeah, kind of like a follow-up on that too. So have you done anything to where like UFO abductees, where, I mean, is there a common area where people are marked? Because you said like that person when they passed, when they pulled the eyelids back, they saw the markings.
Right.
Is this something that people that are alive have found these markings, or is it only upon death that they're being found?
I think it's both cases. They're both. So they're both when they're alive and when they're dead. So with UFO abduction phenomenon, we have cases of symbols being carved into bodies. Now, this is going to be very interesting because you just triggered something in my mind. But yes, we do have those markings in the UFO abduction phenomenon. But remember when I told you soul first, body second?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've worked with a one woman who's told, she heard one of my cases, and she said, "Oh my God, I got to send you some pictures of what happened to my daughter." They lived in a haunted house. She said that these entities were scratching her daughter. You guys ready for this? This mind blower. But the scratches were subdermal first. They were not going into the skin. They were coming out of it. And so again, whatever we're dealing with here, even in hauntology, they're playing by different rules. Even when they're scratching people, it's not just boom, it's coming through to the surface. So it's almost as if what we're dealing with is not just interdimensional, but they're affecting us spirit first, body second in many, many cases.
So yeah, that's an awesome thing. I've never even thought about that before. That the scratches aren't from, they're coming from, you always think something out there to scratch me, but I never thought it was coming from inside out.
Correct. Dr. Michael Lynch is one of my mentors, and he has one of those cases too. Yeah, he said he's watched it where it comes to the surface, which is, God, the implications for our species. I deal with a lot of people that say, okay, we're not dealing with a threat, and they don't want to work the threat narrative. That's fine. Let China pull your son's soul out of his body. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, let Uncle Joe do that. Let Uncle Joe just walk in, snatch you out of yourself. Right? What's happened in a lot of researchers' minds is because they don't have a jail big enough to put this phenomenon in, they don't want to label it as a threat. And so they gaslight a lot of people. We have people, okay, just now, if you look on Joe Murgia on Twitter, which I follow, I mean, I love his research, but he echoes some of my own sentiments. We have cases where orbs have passed through people and burned them from the inside out. Orbs. I'm not talking about flakes of dust. I'm talking about conscious orbs that interact with people. You can see them, and they have their own intelligence. So whatever we're dealing with here, guys, they're immune to our belief systems. Matter of fact, they've hacked it. They have knowledge of the soul that we don't. They have knowledge of the human potential that they're not teaching us about. They're not teaching us anything that the New Agers haven't already given us. Oh, you got to raise your vibrations. How do I do that? How? How? Right? It's loop around, loop around, loop around. Meanwhile, again, humanity, we're so ignorant of it, we don't even know what portion of our existence to protect.
Wow. Yeah, I was seeing in I was seeing in one of the groups that I'm in, this guy was saying he was kicked out of bed and he had bruises on his back. And the naysayers were like, no, a ghost, a orb is not big enough to kick a grown man out of bed and put scars on him. And they were like, well, maybe you should set up some cameras. He was like, well, I got cameras. They're glitching out. So their energy must be so strong that it's blanking out the cameras. Because they were like, well, maybe you're sleepwalking. He was like, no, I was pushed out of bed by this entity, and now I have bruises on my back, and I live by myself. I'm like, that is crazy.
It's a wild phenomenon. I had an incubus case. Lady just actually contacted me this morning. I got to get with her again. But when I went to the house, I had just cleansed the house down the street from an entity that had murdered somebody, which I don't want to. We'll talk about that maybe in another show or something, but because I don't have time. But I just cleansed the house from an entity that had murdered somebody, and then I get another phone call like a week later, an incubus case. I go into this house. I talk to the husband and wife, and the wife is like at the dinner table, she's crying, like she was bawling, like this entity really affected her. It really did. It's almost like it had a serial killer pathology. When it walked into a room, you knew it was there. It made you feel like you're dumb, like this dude has an IQ of 160 or something, and what are we going to do with it, But this entity was laying in between the husband and wife at nighttime. He said you could feel it. And we discovered that because we were sitting at the dinner table, and he's like, the husband was like, I don't understand. And he goes, how is it possible that I could feel it near my feet the same time my wife can feel it playing with her hair? And I said, that's very easy. It's literally laying in between you guys at nighttime. He challenged the entity, and that night the entity, this is the only way it's how he experienced it and how he interpreted the experience rather. But he said it felt like someone punched him in the face in the middle of the night. And he woke up the next day. He had to go to the emergency room because the entity gave him Bell's palsy. Half of his face looked like he had a stroke. And the doctor looked at him and said, you've suffered some extreme head trauma. Did you get in a car wreck? What happened to you? So these entities are extremely powerful. I mean, when you have the ability to treat the body or to treat the soul like we treat the body, to abduct people out of themselves. Can you go to war? Imagine going to war with them with our pilots and then just pulling the consciousness out of every pilot.
That's gotta suck, being slapped in the face by some shit you can't fight.
He said that to me, actually. He was tore up about it, man. He was like, wow. He goes, because he was kind of like, I wouldn't say he was a biker, but he was kind of like, muscular, and he was older, but he was still a tough guy, man. And he's like, he goes, it almost emasculated because like I don't know how to defend my family, my wife. I don't. He's like, because I can't see it. I can't, But that was a case that was wild because the entity would actually call the wife, call the husband. One time the wife was fixing dinner, and her phone lights up, and it answered his own phone call. Boop, receive. And then it speaks to her on speakerphone. Get over here. Come here. Talk to me. Wow. So yeah, these guys are just. But yeah, that's very interesting cases.
Yeah, that's. Did he recover? By the way, give people finality.
Yeah, he recovered, but yeah, he
physically, but maybe not mentally.
Yeah, I won't go into it, but you're exactly right. Yeah, he took a hiatus and just
No, we definitely did, because see, I mean, I didn't even get to half of the stuff I had written down for you.
Good, man. Good.
Yeah,
I did my job.
That's right. That's what it's always good. That's what I love. It's like when you have the notes. I mean, see, it's even color coded. It's even.
There we go.
That's how.
Also, for future reference, you might want to write this down too. Another reference that I always make, which I didn't get into the literature either, is R.E.L. Masters. Excuse me. His name is R.E.L. Masters. He has a book called Eros and Evil, and you'll start to see these entities, the UFO abduction phenomenon, start to manifest as early as the medieval period with the witch era literature. It's just fascinating stuff, man.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, like you said, we can get down the road, especially once your book's out and stuff like that. Yep. Would you be willing to come back on?
Of course, yeah.
Right. Sure. Awesome. Yeah, because like I said, we'll get to that.
You know what that reminded me of? Okay, that reminded me of Chris Farley, who was like, "Do you remember?"
Yeah.
And, you know what I mean? He was like, "Oh yes, awesome."
Rest in peace, that was Chris. That was he was one of my favorite actors, man. Rest in peace. Yeah. So well, hey Nathaniel, man, really appreciate it. Like I said, and I said just hang out after the show. Like I said, we'll talk to you here in a second. So just hang out when we get done here.
Sure, dude,
don't hang up. So. All right, everybody. Well, this episode, brought to you by Three Beards Podcast. Go buy some merchandise, support us. You can link to it either by going to redbubble.com with Three Beards Podcast in there, or you can go to threebeardspodcast.com, click the gear shop right there, and that'll take you right there too as well. Patreon.com/Three Beards Podcast. You can adopt one of our homeless beards and support us that way. Check us out on all the social medias. Like, subscribe, follow, hit that notification bell, do whatever you can, share the show, Those of you that have, we really appreciate it. Those of you who watched, thank you so much. Go send Nathaniel friend request there. Go subscribe on, like I said, YouTube. Go,
man, I
support him. He's got a book coming out. Let's see. Do you still have the Squarespace thing set up for the pre-orders?
Yeah, man.
So let me. As we're doing this here, I'm going to try to bring this up here so people can see that. Because then if people can go there and come on, where's it? Yeah, there it is. All right,
and their skin will crawl.
Yeah, skin. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, that's all you need to do right there.
Yeah, man.
That's so here, just right here. There it is for everybody.
Yes, sir.
So you just go to. You can just type in the skin that crawls, Nathaniel Gillis. You'll see it right there, the Squarespace thing. Go real easy. Check out.
Dude, thank God.
Google Pay, right? And you get it. And are you still offering when people do that, the autograph?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
So you can get an autograph.
Yeah, I'm ordering them all to myself first, ship them, and then I'm shipping them out. So
$7.99, get a awesome book. Like I said, if the show treated you, definitely do that. So there's that. But everybody, thank you for watching. Appreciate it. Stay tuned for the next show. But that's it for this one. Good night.